So here's the thing about King Kong. His name implies everything that you need to know. King Kong. While usurpers would have you believe a lizard that likes to take naps underground because he got hugged too hard and brought up into the sky is a real king, King Kong has been putting the work in on Skull Island and destroying lizards, whether they be smaller or larger than him. And with a name like Skull Island, you know it really wasn't that easy of an upbringing. So today, we're going to be talking about why King Kong is absolutely going to put the smackdown on Godzilla for multiple reasons, and by the end of this, I think you'll understand why while such gaming's faith in an overgrown radioactive lizard is misplaced, there's only one true king, and he's Big Monkey. With a gigantic movie on the horizon concerning these two battling it out, we all know there's likely going to be a moment there where way bigger Jaws shows up and it just kind of unites them, but for the sake of debate, let's assume that doesn't happen and these two are quite literally there to fight till the end. What would happen? Well, let's jump into discussing why King Kong would defeat Godzilla, and make sure to stay tuned till the end for a leaked video that 100% supports my claim. Now, just as a heads up, if you are from Wow Such Gaming's channel, you're going to hear a very similar phrasing on this, but let's be real here. Him and I could go probably over every second of this trailer, analyzing every minute detail concerning damage, what they were looking at, and a glint of a reflection in each other's eyes to determine what may be going on, but in both our opinions, that would be over-analyzing the situation. Everything in the trailers would be based purely on our opinions and ideas of what's going on. I know, quite unlike the fight that I'm literally about to present to you, but using their actual strengths and weaknesses as opposed to the trailer kind of seems like a better way forward, especially because it's supported concerning Godzilla and King Kong. But this fight is actually going to be decided by you guys. In a few weeks, we will announce on our community tabs the victor of this battle based on the likes in the videos. So if you think I'm right, which, I mean, come on, then like this video. But if you think Wow Such Gaming is right, then head on over to his channel and heretically like his video. So to understand what an absolute powerhouse King Kong is, we must first understand his background to get a good idea on what his future is and why he would be able to hold his own against a giant lizard, which interestingly enough, it appears his kind has before. In the distant past, at some point or another, King Kong's species, or super species as they're known, has come into contact with Godzilla. The cave painting references similar in size for them and a massive battle taking place. Even while this was in the distant past, based on the cave painting, people are still in the picture watching the battle take place, so it was at some point when humans were around. The reasoning behind this interaction is one based on Godzilla being territorial and King Kong species somewhat valuing human life and really having an innate desire to protect it. Seeing as Godzilla hasn't always been playing for Team Human and King Kong for the most part has, this may have spawned hostile interactions amongst one another. The outcome of this battle is really not known and is just completely lost to time, but considering Kong's species is still very much so alive and so is Godzilla, it would appear as though likely it was a stalemate. Kong species is what's known as a super species. Having descended from apes, much like the theory of how humans arose, Kong species grew to massive size. Being confined to an island that is shrouded in storms and thus was protected from prying eyes, this would ultimately make him an unknown to humanity. The island wouldn't be discovered again until 1944 by complete accident. An American and Japanese pilot were in the middle of a dogfight when both were shot down by one another. After crash landing and continuing their battle on foot, they would eventually be interrupted by King Kong. Being confined to the island, they would attempt several escapes, but go on to build a ship before gunpowder eventually met his end. However, in 1973, after the space race was in full swing, satellites would capture a glimpse of some unknown landmass in the Pacific completely encircled by a storm. Upon going to the island, the military and scientists would find themselves hilariously not at the top of the food chain any longer. After dropping explosives onto the ground to map out the hypothesized tunnels to support their hollow earth theory, they would not only wake up creatures known as skull crawlers, but they would also alert Kong to their presence. Kong immediately began smacking helicopters out of the sky and throwing trees at them like annoying insects, and resisted most of what the military could throw at him. Ultimately, every bird was brought down, leaving humans on foot to traverse a dangerous terrain. However, Kong wasn't just doing this for funsies. Humanity had inadvertently awoken a threat that King Kong had been battling for quite some time. For seemingly as long as the island has been around, skull crawlers have been snapping up humans when awoken. Kong species has seemingly been there protecting humanity for a very long time from these creatures, but if you notice, King Kong is the last one. When he was a newborn, Kong's parents were taken out by the largest of the skull crawlers known as as the Skull Devil. His mother hid him in a cave and then closed up the entrance as his father held them off. However, after they fell, the skull crawlers eventually ate and then left, and Kong exited the cave with a new lifelong hatred of these creatures. It is stated that if Kong gets to them when they are young, then he really has no issue taking out like 3 or more at a time. But the largest, known as the Skull Devil, is still sleeping, and that's what took out Kong's parents. However, humanity continues to screw around and then eventually does find out, and they end up waking up the big one. Fortunately, however, things are much more different this time around. Despite being cited that Kong is only an adolescent, he was still able to completely massacre the same creature that took out both his parents. Likely this is due to, say, the differences between a trained MMA fighter and just your average run-of-the-mill dude at a bar at 3 a.m. who's on a Jaeger-fueled rage. Kong's parents may not have been as adept at fighting skullcrawlers as they went underground and continued to grow, and upon coming back up, overwhelmed the rusty parents. Whereas Kong has been fighting these things with a burning hatred since day one, which has kept him strong, sharp, and capable. After destroying that which destroyed his parents, it didn't really stop there. During the events of Godzilla, King of the Monsters, Kong heard Ghidorah's call, but just completely ignored it, unlike the other titans. Seemingly being his own king, much like Godzilla, he again heard it but said, nah. But not only that, any skullcrawlers who tried to answer the call were immediately taken out as Kong continued to stay on his island, disregarding the rising threat. And this drops us off to where we are today. Kong's past is riddled with clues to his strengths. Many of those make him unmatched by anything on the island, whether they be enemies or the memory of his species. Seemingly being the strongest one of them all and hardened by continuous battle, we of course have to discuss what exactly makes King Kong such a formidable foe and humanity at the complete mercy of this giant monkey. First thing to note about his abilities is his physical stature. For clarity's sake, during the events of 1973 as well as 1944, Kong was still quite young. Being considered an adolescent, he stood at over 100 feet tall, or roughly 32 meters tall. However, he wasn't just some giant gorilla that became oversized. Instead, he has something very unique about his species that is the exact same thing that makes humanity unique. He actually stands upright. Most apes use their forelimbs to aid in walking, and while they can walk for limited periods of time upright, this is not a permanent arrangement, and they will invariably return back to walking on all fours. This is due to their center of gravity, shape of their pelvis, and location of their spine being attached to the back of their skull. And this is actually a fairly important point, because this gives us our first strength: intelligence. Apes and humans differ because of this. Our skulls are attached to the underside, allowing for larger brains as the bone supports the weight. Apes have their spine attached to the back of their skull, which because of gravity limits the weight that they can have in their heads, as their necks will become strained. King Kong, because of his upright posture, has this attachment point underneath his skull, leading to, over time, a larger brain and thus increased brain power. Kong is incredibly intelligent, able to identify who's friendly and who's not, even amongst the same groups of humans. He can understand human intent quite easily and react accordingly, like say when he crushes the Colonel. And his understanding has actually saved many people in the group, like unfortunately Brie Larson, who fell in the river. But I'm sure Kong just didn't know about the ridiculous travesty that was the ending of Endgame. Anyways, this also allows him to figure out enemies much faster than other animals would be able to. Like when he was fighting the Skull Devil, and he works out that while this creature was trying to do us all a favor and eat Brie Larson while she was in Kong's hand, he figured out that he could reach deeper into the Skull Demon's throat like a Muppet performer and then disembowel the creature entirely. Doing so annihilated the beast, ending the fight on the spot. Coupled with this, he was able to do what most other apes can do, which is use tools. When getting into fights with skull crawlers, many times it was shown that he would pick up a tree and use it as a bat. This is imperative to showing what's going on inside of his head. Humanity not too long ago picked up a rock and realized, if I throw this, bigger animals get injured and may even run away, despite me not having that much strength. Now take that idea, add it to an animal that does have a ridiculous amount of strength, and the tool usage is unreal. And it's not just using an entire tree as a bat either. Kong grabbed a chain and ripped a boat off an engine, using it as a swingable mace, severely injuring the skull demon in the process. This understanding of weapons that he's casually using suggests that if he gets into an environment with, say, like towers, rebar, concrete, large heavy objects to be thrown, makeshift spears, all this could be used against a foe. So bear that in mind for later. With the intelligence comes the thinking things through, which also leads us to our next strength, which is literally the strength and combat experience that Kong has. Getting a look at Kong, he's likely one of the more stronger of his species that existed, well, that existed because they don't exist anymore. He is covered in thick muscle from all the years of fighting, and even still, he's just like a buff teenager. As the fighting continues, he will continue to grow in size and muscular strength, capable of lifting helicopters up casually, disemboweling creatures with ease, ripping apart a giant squid just because. Fact is, Kong's strength is unrivaled. Where this strength is also important though. Seeing as Kong walks upright, we can see that his arms are incredibly long, longer than his legs actually, and they are massive, possessing a crazy amount of strength with a punch that can completely incapacitate a skull crawler easily, which sends its brain scrambling inside of its skull. The strength of this allows him to rip trees out of the ground and then throw them several miles due to them almost being like pendulums complementing the throwing force. For example, humans have shorter arms. Because of this, back in the day, we couldn't throw spears all that far. However, with our giant brains, we created the spear thrower or the atlatl to help us hunt. This helped us throw spears almost 3 times as far and with more force. Kong's arms work like a natural atlatl, and the transfer an insane amount of force due to this length is extremely high. And this is going to be important in the fight later. These extreme arms allow him to land blows on creatures on the island and to machinery humans have made to completely decimate them, but the rest of the muscular mass shouldn't be ignored. Strength in the arms is only as good as the rest of it on the body, such as the core strength coupled with the pectorals and shoulders sort of balance everything out. Looking at Kong, this dude is just mega jacked. Pretty much swole goals actually. The strength, however, is nothing without stamina. You can be the biggest, baddest dude, but someone who is able to outlast your hits will invariably be able to whittle your energy reserves down over time and eventually knock you out. Kong excels at the stamina game. Traveling around the island all day, every day, his walks take him everywhere. Wherever he goes, however, there's usually a fight. These fights do not appear to be actually wearing him down that much, as he just finishes the fight and then keeps walking to the next area. This can be seen when he fights multiple skull crawlers, as he is quite capable of handling his own with creatures that are even about 3/4 his size, and really just panel a lot of them and still come out on top. Part of the stamina is also the absolute durability of Kong. While far from invincible, he's able to take hits and cuts as well as bites from skull crawlers with very little issue. Yes, he will in fact bleed, as made mention by the Colonel after putting so much lead down range it would have destroyed an entire army, but this bleeding was minimal and only due to a cut on his hand, hardly anything long lasting or permanently damaging. And with stamina comes the ability to use it effectively. Concerning Kong's speed and agility, you'd be surprised to see actually how agile this creature is. He's almost as tall as a skyscraper, and yet he's able to jump high into the air above his enemies, which actually comes out to be almost his height due to the power in his legs, and then come down with devastating blows. With this, he's able to dodge hits effectively and also counterattack the skull crawlers as they launch attacks on him, which is how he effectively uses his combat knowledge to subdue enemies. There are some other advantages Kong may have over his enemies as well, but they are more minorly important. The first being his ability to climb. Almost unrivaled by any other Titan, this gives him the ability to traverse mountains much more easily and also get out of the line of sight and also danger, sort of like how Spider-Man was able to climb up during the cage match for 3 minutes as a wrestler could not get to him. He also is extremely good at hearing, meaning that he can hear something treading from miles away, and considering he heard Ghidorah's call, he can likely hear Godzilla's call as well. He just really chooses to ignore them. Should he know a fight is coming though, he could actively track Godzilla just by listening. Now, on the other end of this, however, is King Kong is still an animal. Not only that, he seems to be actively evolved into the super species he is, which means, again, he's an animal. So because of this, he's not an invincible god. His body, while exceedingly powerful and protected by thick skin and muscle, is still definitely susceptible to damage. And this is because he lacks any type of body armoring. The most armoring that you could really say that he has is the thick, shaggy fur located all over his body. However, this lack of armor may in turn result in a strength towards being more agile, as he's not bogged down with thick plating. Another disadvantage that he may have is his healing factor. King Kong is a mammal and as such has a mammalian healing factor. His body isn't inspired by some massive radiation spike which forces him to heal faster like Godzilla can, but instead he must go through a natural process of momentarily increased mitosis to heal all his wounds. Because of this, while his body may be capable energy-wise of continuing a fight, he will still need time to rest up and heal from battles. This, however, continues to only be a partial disadvantage, as Godzilla is by no means invincible either. After getting his body beaten by Ghidorah, even Godzilla had to really just kind of go into a tunnel and heal for several years, or he would have had a nuke not been detonated in his face, forcing his body to heal. And we have seen this healing factor fail him when he went missing for 5 years after fighting the Mutos and receiving substantial damage. So with the strengths and weaknesses played out for Kong, it's important to get a full picture of what's happening between these two titans so you can choose for yourself why you think King Kong would win. win. Or again, Godzilla if you're a heretic. And you may be sitting there right now saying, wait a minute, Roanoke, Godzilla is like 390 feet tall. Are you really telling me that King Kong, at a paltry 104 feet tall, being a little over 1/4 his size, is going to do much of anything? Well, I'm here to tell you that, remember, King Kong was an adolescent during the 1970s. Since then, almost 50 years has passed, and during that, gains were made. Kong is now fully an adult. He has reached a height of 350 feet tall and packed on tons, and actually outweighs Godzilla by almost 59 tons. He is quite literally 38% heavier and beefier than Godzilla. This weight isn't just fat either. Thicker bones, stronger bones, more muscle mass, all this really comes out to much more powerful hits. And there's gonna be some guy in the comments that says, thicker bones don't actually mean stronger bones. Yeah, they do. Look at dinosaur bones. Anyways, something to bear in mind, Kong had no issue incapacitating the reptiles on his island if they were smaller than him by a marginal amount and completely ripping out the guts of the largest one, so just remember that. As he has grown over the last 50 years, the amount of force is almost immeasurable in what the limbs may impart. Not to mention, the weight is a factor, as we have all seen other titans throw their body mass into Godzilla, completely knocking him around. So the question to all of this is, who would actually win in this fight? Well, I am here to inform you it is absolutely King Kong who would wipe the floor with Godzilla, and here's why. The battle opens up with the two meeting either likely in a city or open landscape. It would more than likely be this, as Kong would have no need to go into Godzilla's turf, which is the water. Although likely Godzilla would retreat there after the whooping he's about to get, and we will talk about that later. The first benefit that Kong has is things around him. He's capable of picking up literal mountaintops at this point, hurling them towards Godzilla. Because of the extra muscle mass that he has, it would also hit with more force. However, taking into consideration Godzilla's plating, it would likely only knock him off balance. The thing is, however, this isn't just rocks that he can hurl, but trees from several miles, and being a primate, everything around him is a tool that he can use to attack Godzilla at a distance, meaning that he can injure and deplete him from afar before getting in close. If this happens in a city, it would be much more advantageous to Kong. Things like towers could be used as literal spears to impale the lizard more easily and bypass that armor plating that protects it from blunt injury attacks. Kong can also climb up large buildings, jumping and descending on the lizard, completely smashing into his skull, which has a few effects. While I doubt it would cave in the skull due to the sheer durability that Godzilla has, I have no doubt that this would daze Godzilla for a while, leaving him open to attacks that Kong would absolutely have the energy to put down range. While using your environment is great, Godzilla would still have a few attacks at his disposal. Obviously, the radiation breath would be a fairly large issue to deal with. This gives Godzilla the ability to attack from afar, while King Kong goes ape mode and throws buildings, cars, towers, trees, homes, whatever, at the giant lizard. However, I see Kong overcoming this issue at a distance in several ways. First is, King Kong's agility is ridiculous. Godzilla charge up time to get his radiation breath going is several seconds, starting from the tail and working its way up. Even if you didn't know what was really going on, this is a clear indicator that something is happening. King Kong, using his intelligence, would figure out pretty quickly what Godzilla was doing and would then see the beam amassing in its mouth. He could quickly get out of the way or dive behind cover, as the beam isn't really a permanent existence scenario. We see when Godzilla was knocked over by Ghidorah in Antarctica that the beam actually hits a building, blows it up, but does not continue on to the other side. Because of this, buildings would actually offer pretty good cover, at least for one shot. The second option is to just straight up dodge the beam, and this seems incredibly possible as Godzilla misses Ghidorah entirely and wasn't able to correct the beam's path, meaning that once it's fired, it may be so bright Godzilla can't really see where the enemy is. And this means that Godzilla likely loses his sight, which you never want to happen in a battle. And the third possible option is, just like we saw Ghidorah do where he knocked over Godzilla while he was firing the beam, Kong could just get out of the way and then punch Godzilla in the face, and Godzilla wouldn't even know what was happening. And considering Kong's arms are gigantic, this would be a devastating hit. And if Kong really just wanted to stay far away, he could continue his assault using everything around him at his disposal and continue just straight up chucking things down range. Eventually, however, this battle would really lead to something like trench warfare. Both sides are stuck at a distance. This, however, is a very human trait when it comes to fighting, and likely between titans, this wouldn't take place. Eventually, they would move in closer where Godzilla is severely lacking in the fight department, but he does still appear to have a few good countermeasures if he's able to use them. The first thing to note is Godzilla is taller, but King Kong is beefier. In humans, this usually makes for a very interesting fight because of something called reach. A taller person is going to have longer arms than a shorter, beefier person. So standing upright and fighting actually favors the taller person because they're able to reach you better than you can reach them. But should someone who's short and stocky get someone who's long and lanky onto the ground, if they both possess the same amount of combat knowledge, the shorter, stockier person is the favored outcome in the fight. In the King Kong Godzilla fight, however, it's completely just muddled and the other way around. So go ahead, take a look at Godzilla's arms. He looks like SpongeBob during that episode where he puts 2 marshmallows on a twig and barely lifts it. Godzilla has arms that are much more likened to a scrawny lizard like an iguana than an actual proportional arm. In fact, I'd go as far as to say the arms are virtually useless in a fight, as shown when a Muto attacks him from behind and Godzilla cannot reach the creature. And this thing continued to just beat the crap out of him because he can't get it off his back. King Kong, on the other hand, has large, stronger arms, meaning there is no way Godzilla could use his arms defensively in really any capacity against King Kong. The one thing Godzilla does have going for him is the tail, however. The tail is absolutely powerful, and should a swipe hit King Kong, it would likely result in the wind being knocked out of him, or even possibly a momentary knockout, much like how the napalm knocked Kong out on Skull Island, and they were able to sort of incapacitate him for a moment. However, should this moment not be taken, which considering Godzilla doesn't quickly work out how enemies are and how they function, he may think that Kong is really just finished. However, due to Kong's durability, he would be able to quickly get back up and continue his attack. As the fight drags on, something would begin to happen, however. Godzilla would invariably figure out how Kong's attacks operate, but Kong is likely smarter than Godzilla in this respect, meaning that eventually Kong would find weak points to attack, seeing as all his attacks on the giant lizard are not doing as much damage as they should. Eventually, Kong would notice something on Godzilla's neck: gills. Gills are an absolute weak point for Godzilla, and when fighting the Mutos, they would actually go after them, causing him to bleed and staggering him in the process. King Kong may not have sharp talons to dig into the gills, but what he does have are grasping hands. Getting in close and jumping on Godzilla's back, there's really not much the lizard could actually do against this attack, as discussed previously. King Kong could then start just pounding on the gills or grasping at them, and in the process, this could damage the gills, causing them to bleed and even tear, injuring Godzilla greatly. The lizard would obviously freak out at this point and then begin running into things to get Kong off his back, which invariably would knock him off, but it'll show Kong that this enemy does have a weak point, and a fairly glaring one at that. The rest of the fight would likely be attacking these gills with anything around him. Over time, this would yield some success as Godzilla begins to get exhausted after prolonged combat and weak point constantly being attacked. To Godzilla's credit though, through bites, scratches, and possible scalding from close radiation beam attacks, King Kong would likely be damaged as well at this point. Incurring this much damage would probably eventually start trying the actual stamina of King Kong, but it's known that he has really more of this than Godzilla does. Godzilla would likely begin a retreat at this point from the destroyed landscape. Moving towards the water, King Kong would give chase. Entering the water would seem like a bad idea, but after this fight, King Kong isn't just about to let this nonsense with this lizard just go away. He would enter, and this would likely not be the most strategical move. Seeing as Godzilla is amphibious and works well on water and land, and King Kong is a mammal who can kind of go into the water but prefers land, this is now Godzilla's turf. Likely the lizard would continue to fight King Kong in the water as King Kong pins the lizard in the water, but then realizes that he's actually not struggling and can sort of breathe underwater. A beam of radiation shoots out, knocking King Kong backwards, and the lizard gets up and starts beating Kong with his tail and claws. Kong cannot breathe under the water, but eventually through sheer mass is able to knock Godzilla off. Godzilla, continuing to try to escape and heal up in a tunnel, would be pursued by Kong as they both entered the deeper water. Godzilla, remembering the fight with Ghidorah, then would grab Kong, pull him down, but something is different. All the attacks made on his gills have decreased his ability to breathe under the water effectively until he heals. He is forced back up to the top with Kong exhaustedly, as then King Kong would probably start dragging Godzilla back towards the land. With Godzilla's inability to escape to the tunnels and heal, as he can no longer navigate the deep waters effectively, means that his solution to leaving the fight is now gone. So this continues to remain a knockdown, drag-out fight. Reaching a point of exhaustion for Godzilla unlocks the thermonuclear mode. This last-ditch energy release sends out radiation shockwaves, burning and scalding everything in its way. This is the ultimate answer to Kong's attacks. As seen with Ghidorah, it does in fact burn away a lot of flesh. However, despite having no armor plating on his body, Kong still does have the ability to take a few of these hits. The first one would hit his fur, and this would likely singe it and immediately cause pain. So have you ever put your hand on like a hot pan or stovetop for a second and had a reflex reaction? You don't even have time to think about it, it just happens. Likely, Kong would do the same thing. As the first wave hit, he would immediately jump backwards, putting more distance between him and Godzilla. As the second wave hits, but further away, he would kind of get the idea that, ow, heat was hot, and then move quickly, getting outside of the third wave blast before it badly burns him. He would also likely put any remaining buildings in the way of him and the heat source, severely lowering the ability of Godzilla to use this effectively. And this energy is not sustainable, however. Think about about burning through the last bit of gas in your car by gunning it down the road to a gas station. In effect, this is what Godzilla is doing, using the last bit of his energy as a thermonuclear answer. King Kong should be able to understand that this is really bad and then get away from it in time, as the reddish coloring eventually fades away from Godzilla as he runs into a similar issue of not being able to effectively hit King Kong with his radiation beam. Blowing through all that juice did in fact hurt King Kong, but he's still very much alive and will be able to fight. Moving back in, King Kong is able to finish the job as Godzilla has completely exhausted all of his energy at this point, likely treating Godzilla like one of the larger skull devils that stalked his own island, and, I mean, he is a reptile after all. So I believe King Kong has got Godzilla beat in several areas. His understanding of how to use tools means a distance game is no longer just Godzilla's game. The strength he has in his body likely severely outclasses Godzilla's ability to put damage down range, except for his tail and his, laser beam. But with that said, the weight of King Kong might make the tail hits less effective than on other creatures the same size as Godzilla. To boot, the strength of the muscle in Kong means that likely if he saw a tail swipe coming, he could possibly be able to grab the tail and hold it, and then pull Godzilla to the ground. The differences in arms means that Godzilla in close hand-claw combat would be at a disadvantage, as Kong's arms have further reach and likely more power in them, considering Godzilla is absolutely scrawny by comparison. Godzilla does have more armor plating on his body and could likely cause scratches and heat damage to Kong's body, and the healing factor of Kong isn't amazing, but remember, any damage to Godzilla from either the gills or things being thrown at him aren't immediately healed just because. He needs to absorb radiation to repair himself. So if he can't get to a radiation source, his healing factor isn't really that much better than Kong's and could take years to properly heal. This close quarters combat would also not be great for Godzilla, because even though he can square up and attack, he lacks the agility and stamina of Kong and likely wouldn't be able to keep up for very long and would have to rely more and more on his armor plating to protect him from the constant hits. And even still, he's got a glaring weakness known as his back, which he will have an extremely tough time defending from a 158-ton primate who knows that this is exclusively a weak point due to how smart he is. Godzilla is something of a glass cannon in my opinion. Extremely powerful from afar, but if any damage begins happening to him, the only thing he's really got is his tail, his radiation breath, and his armor plating, as well as some intelligence to eventually understand his enemy. King Kong, on the other hand, is like a jack of all trades, which is the same thing that made humanity successful. Able to use tools such as spears, blunt objects, trees as bats, maces made out of boat engines. He could use all of this to bypass Godzilla's defenses and then go in for the gills. His agility would outclass and outmatch Godzilla in close combat, and his ability to keep fighting for prolonged periods means that it really just comes down to a time game at a certain point. All this combined with the constant fighting Kong had to endure while he was on his island and the knowledge that he had acquired by overcoming giant lizards would culminate into one giant ass-kicking for Godzilla. So you may be wondering about the thermonuclear counterattack. Well, in reality, it isn't that great. While catching Ghidorah off guard and burning off his wings, that meant that he wasn't able to fly away. Ghidorah preferred to fly. So Ghidorah really lacked the ability to be agile on the ground, and as a result, he was burned away and eventually his head was completely incinerated by radiation breath. Kong, however, would be able to get away from the blast as long as he wasn't pinned down by something or severely injured to which he couldn't move, which I have discussed ad nauseum, and this is likely not to be the case. So with all that said, and King Kong coming out as the victor, we all know what's probably really gonna happen. While Godzilla and a member of King Kong species have fought in the past, there is a reason that they have avoided one another for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years. Godzilla is territorial and King Kong just wants to be left alone, so they coexist as two different kingdoms. In this scenario, they may not even really fight to the end, seeing as if they have come across one another before and left it alone, this might be what they do again. And I think we have a pretty good idea in the movie how it will likely turn out. They will team up to fight a bigger threat when both of them are at half juice. Then they decide that they are really on the same side when it comes to humanity, and then just kind of walk away like they did before. So with King Kong being the ultimate victor, however, if you need more proof that King Kong could totally stomp Godzilla, I think this leaked video will prove everything that you need to know about my argument.
Ready? Go!